Okay, let's talk about loops. So if you wanted to do something like log out 0, 1, and 2 in succession, you could do something like this, or you could use a for loop. And this is a for loop, so a for loop has a certain pattern it follows. So you will start with var I equals 0. Now the I can be anything, but in this case it's just for convenience sake. You'll see the I used quite a bit. And this part here is called an initializer, and that means that this is going to be where you declare what your starting value is going to be. Like this 0 could be any number, but we want to start at 0. And then you have your condition that you're checking, which is I is less than 3. So as long as I is less than 3, this loop is going to run. And then you have something called a modifier, a mutator, and that's the last segment here, which means that every time you loop, every time it executes, you're going to increase I by 1. That's what this plus plus means. So it goes from 0 to 1 to 2, and it logs out everything in succession. But when it hits 3, it's going to stop because we're checking that I is less than 3 and 3 is equal to 3. So we're just going to get 0, 1, and 2. Now be careful and make sure that you're using semicolons here, because that's the way that you segment these 3 sections. And in order for it to properly work, that needs to be there. And that's how a for loop works. So let's look at an example of how you can use a for loop in a very useful way. Think of an array, and let's say that you wanted to log out all the elements inside that array, but you want to do it backwards. How would you do that? Well, the cool part about a for loop is that you can do pretty much anything in terms of going backwards or forwards in your counting. So let's say that I start I off at 2. Which means that I is now 2, and then the condition is, okay, while I is greater than or equal to 0, remove 1 for each iteration through the loop from I. So we're going to start at 2, and then we're going to go down here, and we're going to say, alright, give me number 2, like the second element from the array, when remember, arrays start at 0, so we're going to count 0, 1, 2, which means that the first time we're going to get a 3, so we get a 3, and then we remove 1 from I, which gives us a 1, and so I is 1 now, so get me number 1, position 1 from the array, so 0, 1, that's our 2, so we log out that, then we get all the way back to 0, so I is now 0, so array 0 index, that's number 1, and we print out the 1, and now we can see that, okay, we're equal to 0, so let's stop this iteration and let's not log out anything else. So we get 3, 2, and 1, and that's an example of how you can use a for loop. So let's say that you had an object, and you had an object with keys like this, so 1 and 2, and the values are foo and bar. And let's say that you wanted to log out what's inside of this object. Now, you can have any type of object with any type of values. This is just an example, so don't think that this has some special meaning or anything like that. It's just a plain old object, for example. Now, a for loop won't work here because you don't have an array, but a for in loop will work. So as you can see here, you have the for keyword, and then you do var key in my object, which is this object here. And what this is going to do is it's going to go over every key. So this variable key here is going to be given the keys of the object. So what we're doing then is that first we log out the key, and console log, actually, if you didn't know that, can take multiple parameters. So you can do key and then colon and then something else and then colon and move on. So in this case we do key, which is at the first iteration, it's going to be 1, and then my object key, which is going to be foo. So 1 foo, 2 bar. And this is really useful for iterating over objects. And yeah, that's pretty much a for in loop. Right, so let's say that you wanted to do something an unknown amount of time, maybe even forever. Then you would use a while loop. And this is an example of an endless loop. So a while loop takes a Boolean operation, or an Boolean expression rather, and if that expression becomes a true, the while loop keeps on running. It will run one time for every time it evaluates this expression to true. And if you give it a true, it's going to run forever. The same goes for this loop here. This will actually never run because the evaluation happens first. So you check, is this Boolean a true value? Otherwise, don't run. And a false will never be true, so no, that will never run. And here we have an external count variable which starts at 0. And then we check, alright, so as long as count is less than 5, run this loop. So we check, is 0, in this case it starts at 0, so is 0 less than 5? Well, yes it is. So let's run this. So it logs this out, and then we do an increment to the count variable. So next time it's going to be a 1. So is 1 less than 5? Well, yeah. And then it just keeps on going until it hits the value 5, and then it will stop. And that's pretty much a while loop. Okay, so let's have a look at a do-while loop. So a do-while loop is a loop that you are guaranteed to execute once. And what that means is that this code here will always run once. So in other words, the evaluation of this while statement here is going to happen after the first iteration, or after each iteration. So this loop here, this is an endless do-while loop. So this is a little bit of silliness on my part. It will run forever +1, and yeah, that is true. It will actually just keep on running as long as this true is here. But let's look at a more serious example. So this do-while loop, well, had this been a while loop, this would have never run, but because of the false here. But since it's a do-while loop, it will actually run this code once, and then it will hit this false statement here, and the operation will not evaluate to true, which means that it's going to stop running after that. And that's pretty much it, really. There's one more example, as you can see here, and it's pretty simple. You have a counter of some sort, so a 0, and then you do a do-while loop. So you log out 0 and you increment that number, and then you're going to check, alright, so is in this case 1, because we started at 0, incremented by 1, so is 1 less than 5? Well, yeah, it is. So it's going to run again and again and again, and it will keep on running until another count is equal to 5. And that's pretty much a do-while loop. Right. Let's say that you for some reason decide that, your loop is done now. Yeah, I don't want it to run anymore. And you wanted to break out of that loop. You would use the break keyword for this. So you can see down here that here we actually have an endless loop. However, what's going to happen is that the while loop is going to see that there's a true here, so it's going to run the code inside of the body, which is going to log out this, and then we're going to hit this break statement here. And what's going to happen is that's going to break out of this loop, and this entire code will actually just run once. And you can use break statements in pretty much any loop, and they're very useful for when you just want to stop the loop for some reason.